Looking at this footage, many people's breath takes away. Bad thoughts come into their heads, and they feel uncomfortable. The death penalty in the United States is a legal punishment in 29 states. The traditional leader in the number of executions is Texas. In the USA, life imprisonment for one person costs the state about $740,000. Death penalty, more than $1 million. The money goes not only for lethal injection, but also for trials, appeals, lawyers, and keeping the prisoner in prison for life on budget money. 1 in 25 of those sentenced to death is innocent. Between 1973 and 2015, 156 people were released from death row in the U.S. with charges dropped, including 6 in 2015. Some had spent decades on death row. In March 2015, all charges were dropped against Deborah Milkey of Arizona, who spent 22 years on death row. Also in the U.S., the waiting period between sentencing and execution is very high. According to the DPIC organization, of the 25 people executed in 2018, only 3 people had been on death row for less than 10 years. The minimum was 7 years. 16 people had been awaiting execution for more than 15 years. 7 people had been on death row for more than 30 years. In Alabama, Walter Leroy Moody had been awaiting execution for 22 years, becoming the oldest person executed in the U.S. since 1976 at age 83. Methods of execution. Currently, various state laws provide 5 methods of capital punishment. Recently, since 2000, the vast majority of executions have been carried out by lethal injection. This method of execution involves injecting a solution of poisons or potent substances into the body of the condemned person. Since 1982, more than 300 people have been executed by lethal injection in the United States. The electric chair has rarely been used recently. This method of execution has not been used in the U.S. since 2013. However, in 2018 in Nashville, Tennessee, 63-year-old Edmund Zagorski chose such a method of execution. In his opinion, such a death should have been faster and less painful. Zagorski was sentenced to death. In 1984, he had been awaiting execution for 34 years. The electric chair in Nashville, where Zagorski was executed on November 1, 2018, before his execution. When asked if he had the last word, Zagorski replied, "Let's rock, let's rock." The gas chamber is designed to mercifully kill people by poisoning them with poisonous or asphyxiating gas. The gas chamber was last used to execute 37-year-old Walter LeGrand in Arizona in 1999. On June 18, 2010, Utah State used a firing squad for the first time in a long time. Ronnie Lee Gardner, who chose the method of execution himself, was shot. He had a choice: lethal injection or firing squad. Gardner became the first suicide bomber to be executed by firing squad in the United States since John Albert Taylor, who was shot in 1996. In 1985, when the judge asked, "What method of execution do you wish to choose?" Gardner replied, "I would prefer to die of old age, Your Honor. But if that is not possible, I choose a firing squad." Hanging has only been used 3 times since 1990, and all 3 times before 2000. As of November 2019, the last person to be executed by hanging in the United States remains murderer Billy Bailey. At the age of 49, he was hanged on the grounds of the Delaware State Correctional Center in Smyrna. The last meal is a special meal that death row inmates receive shortly before execution. All wishes are honored within reason and have some restrictions. Every death row inmate is given the right to have a last word, which is recorded with the aid of a machine. The last words are spoken a few minutes before the execution begins. In Texas, the state that leads the nation in the number of executions, the condemned are held in the death block of Pulaski Prison. an hour north of Houston. At noon, a white van departs from the prison gate to take the condemned person to Hansel Unit, a 40-minute drive from the prison. This is where the Texas State Death Chamber is located. Upon arrival at Huntsville Unit, the condemned person is searched, taken to the showers, given clean clothes, fingerprinted, and placed in solitary confinement. Unlike other states, Texas has since 2011 prohibited inmates from having the right to a last meal due to zoological privilege. By law, the execution must begin after 6 p.m. Huntsville time. Inmates are held until that time approximately 9 feet directly from the door of the execution chamber. The execution chamber is a 2.7 meter by 3.7 meter room. Third parties are usually present at executions. The number and composition of persons entitled to be present at an execution varies from state to state, but as a rule, relatives of the condemned and his victims, lawyers, and a priest have this right. Under Texas law, representatives of the Associated Press can observe the death penalty. 2 groups are housed in 2 adjoining rooms with a view of the execution room through glass windows. 1 room is reserved for the family and relatives of the victim of the crime, the other room for the family and relatives of the condemned. Each time, arrangements are made so that the relatives of the condemned and the victim do not meet. At 6 o'clock in the evening, about 5 men come to pick up the condemned man and take him to the death chamber. After tying him to the couch, he is given the right to have the last word. Then the executioner, whose identity is always concealed by being behind a wall, administers an injection through a special hole. After the injections are administered, death occurs within an average of 5 to 10 minutes. Death certificates write homicide in the cause of death column. After death occurs, an autopsy is performed. The body is then released to the relatives of the executed person. If there are no relatives and kin, burial is carried out in special state cemeteries. In most cases, there are no names on the crosses, only the individual number of the prisoner and the date of execution. By this number, you can recognize that a certain Kenneth Allen McDove is buried here, executed by lethal injection in Texas on November 17, 1998.